Hello, my name is Andy Verwer. I've been coming to Australia to do PROFIBUS training for the last 5.5 years or so. If your company is involved with PROFIBUS in any form at all, then you really need to consider doing some training. The problem with PROFIBUS is that if you have untrained people dealing with it, then they can make very silly mistakes and they can cost you a lot of money. So the training that we do is consists of an introductory course which we call the Certified PROFIBUS Installer Course. A lot of people get confused about this because they think it's just for people that's doing installation, but it's not. It's a basic requirement for anybody who's involved technically with PROFIBUS systems. That can be followed by a number of courses, one of which is the commissioning and maintenance course. The techniques that we teach on the commissioning and maintenance course are techniques that are used on live PROFIBUS systems. So you learn how to fault find and locate faults on systems whilst they're working. We also do a system design course which has a different emphasis really. It's more for people who are involved with specification, procurement and design of systems. Managers will gain a lot from doing the system design course. Very common is power supply failure, and the reason that's a problem is actually quite obscure. What happens is a panel has a certain amount of equipment in it, some PROFIBUS slaves, some masters, and the engineer in charge, he looks at the 24 volts and he says, oh yeah, we need 3, 4, 5 amps, whatever. And he chooses a power supply that delivers the current that that cabinet needs. Let's say it's 4 amps. So he chooses a 5 amp power supply. They commission the system, it works perfectly, they get really good performance, but then a couple of months down the line, an IT guy comes along and he says, oh, I want to put a modem in that cabinet. It needs 24 volts. Where do I get 24 volts from? It's a 24 volt power supply there. So he hooks up to the power supply. The power supply is now delivering not 4 amps but 4.5 amps. It still works, of course, because it's less than the 5 amp current that the device can deliver. But from then on they start getting intermittent faults. What happens is occasionally all the devices in that cabinet fall off the bus. And then they come back on again and they're working. Why should that be? Well, the answer is this. Occasionally the PLC program might be switching on several outputs simultaneously. Imagine there's solenoid valves. A solenoid valve, when you switch it on, takes an inrush current. You put 2 or 3 of those on at the same time and the inrush current can be quite significant. So what happens is the 4.5 amps goes up to 5.5 amps just for a fraction of a second. What does the power supply do when you draw 5.5 amps out of it? It drops its voltage. It can't deliver it. So the voltage, 24 volts, drops down and devices fall off the bus. Of course, as soon as they fall off the bus, the watchdog timers trip out and they fail safe. The outputs get switched off, which means that the current goes back down to 4.5 amps and the 24 volts comes back up again. Everybody's happy. So the symptom is that several devices have fallen off the bus because the current momentarily went over the limit. But when you look at this without knowing what the cause is, it looks like a PROFIBUS failure. So when you see this happening, what you really should do is look for common cause failures. You should say, the devices that have fallen off the bus, which you can tell from your analyzer, what's common to those devices? Maybe they're all on the same segment. Maybe they're all in the same cabinet, all on the same power supply. So you can answer that kind of question and home in on where the problem is. If you suspect it's a power supply, it's really useful just to monitor the current that's coming out of that power supply. A simple clip-on Hall effect ammeter is really useful. Make sure you get a DC meter and you just clip it around one of the power supply cables. Don't clip it around both because you can't measure the total current then. Just one of the power supply cables and just measure what the current is. If it's close to the limit of that power supply, then suspect that might be the problem. The other thing to watch out for is loose terminals, of course. You can quite easily get a terminal on a power supply that's not been screwed up. And a little bit of vibration causes the devices to fall off. It's the same symptom.
Back in 2006, when we first started to install PROFIBUS through our systems, through our water plants, water treatment plants, and also wastewater treatment plants, it was all sort of new to us, and the people, the contractors who were actually installing the PROFIBUS didn't have any understanding of where the actual wire should go. And as from learning, the most important thing is the installation. If the installation's right, everything should carry on and be okay. So since then, most of our blokes have done the installs and the maintenance course. Our standards have changed to make sure that the people installing the equipment are actually licensed. The switchboard builders are actually licensed. So then it minimises the problems on startup and how, you know, if it's installed properly, it should last. And since that day, we've had a lot more installed, and now we actually make sure, for that reason, all the testing and commissioning is done up front. So we do know if there's any problems, and it's rectified. It's also rectified at switchboard factory acceptance tests. Before the switchboard leaves site, it's actually PROFIBUS cables checked to see where it's run and how it's going to be run, and the segregation that it needs to be run. So from then on, basically, we don't have a lot of PROFIBUS problems, but just if the installation, we've had water leaking and junction boxes failing, which causes the odd problem, which is good to sort of see. But once now that we've had a Profi trace for 3 years and self-taught, and plus with Andy's help, most of the blokes are getting a bit of a handle on how it works and how to rectify faults and understand it. Because they were in our standards, I think this is going to continue on for a long time. Anything that's built or retrofitted from now on is actually retrofitted with PROFIBUS into our Siemens PCS7 system, which is the standard system we use through all our plants.